the big joy of being able to do these Femme Futurists interviews is partly to meet people around the world that I haven't met before, but it's also to dig into the lives and thoughts and ideas of the people that I think I know really well already. So, Elizabeth, I'm so excited that you were able to join us today. We're able to have a more in-depth conversation than sometimes we get to have, when we're just strolling somewhere or grabbing a slice of pizza together. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here, and you're always an inspiration to me. And I am hoping to just dig into some parts of our lives that, we don't know so much about each other.
Well, I think that that's the part. So the really, the genesis again of this interview series was that there are all these women that are doing extraordinary things around the world to build and shape and cultivate our future. And it's just fun when you get to be in conversation with them. So basically, we're just recording the kind of conversation that we would have if we were just sitting around, having a cup of tea together. And digging into each other's ideas and work. And so you and I was thinking about it this morning, met back in Atlanta, I don't know how many years ago, but it was like at the emergence of when people started talking about blockchain. And you were generous enough to host a whole gathering of people that were coming to Atlanta with our friend Anita. I think she was the one who was creating it. And I found myself very fortunate to be in this room with you all, trying to learn as much as I could about what was emerging at that time. So, tell me more about how that came about. Like, have you been in that world of the blockchain stuff for a long time?
Well, I mean, I think that was really close to around 2017-ish. And I got, inspired by it through art and technology. And so while Anitha was much more of the strategist and the financier and really knew a lot about that area, I knew a lot about technology, education, and art, and the difficulty in making a living in art. So
Right.
that's how we kind of came together, and just we're starting to imagine the uses of blockchain. This was before the whole NFT thing came about, but I was definitely on thinking about this idea of how do you take a piece of digital intellectual property of any sort and then claim it or own it, as opposed to duplicate it and just sort of lose your use the origin of who created it and lose the potential to make a living off of it.
It's so much more to dig into that conversation. Actually, I listened to an interesting interview this morning that would tie back to this. So, and take me back to your background, because you have such an interesting story about how you got into this world. Because it was actually cool to go to that event and see so many women that were part of it and then organizing it, not just attending. And so, tell me how your origin story.
Yeah. So I just went, and not knowing what I was doing, I got a degree in philosophy as my first degree because, college was to be for the mind and not for careers. I mean, that was such a part of what higher education was supposed to be about. What a luxury and what a gift I think it was for me. I was taught by Jesuit priests at Boston College. I barely even knew what Catholic was, coming from Atlanta. But it was great and mind-opening for me. But I was always into photography. So I also got a minor in photography, but I always built my own dark rooms. And so I always had this sort of technology bend. But then I did some social work, and that was really hard. As a matter of fact, the name of my job was I worked for emotionally disturbed adolescent girls at a halfway house. It was hard, and boy, did that open my eyes to what people. I mean, yeah, I'm already getting teary just thinking about it. It was so hard, but it was such hard work that after about a year, it was too much for me. And I wasn't really educated enough to know really what I was doing. I was thrown into the fire there. But meanwhile, back in Atlanta, they really needed math teachers. And so I decided that I would go back and be a math teacher in high school, because that's what my mom had done. And so I came back to Georgia State, and I was studying math, and computer science and the internet was coming up. And my roommates were into computer science. So I just got a second degree in computer science and helped set up the internet at Georgia State University.
Wow. Let's talk about timing. Again, you've always been like in these amazing moments of,
Yeah,
of a birth, I guess, of genesis of these things.
I'm definitely, I've never really completely called myself a futurist until I did a little future studies courses and that sort of thing. But I'm definitely scanning the future, and looking for the next new thing, both in culture and technology. So I love avant-garde art, and that whole thing. And I really think that ties in a lot to what, that's sort of, it's a precursor to where things are going. But anyway, so I got into the internet, and then I worked for a startup that was called MindSpring that became Earthlink. And those tech skills were just so.
Yeah, let me back up. What was your role there? That was actually a really cool role that
Oh,
you had.
yeah. So I was hired. They were still at Georgia Tech in the incubator when I came on, and they were doing dial-up. So people were, getting on the internet, and they were doing dial-up. But they had this idea that people might want to host websites that would have information about a company. And many of the engineers thought that that was completely stupid. But my boss, who I think was 19 or 20 years old, he hadn't even finished school, or he was the business guy. And then we had a sales guy, and then I was the engineer. And
I love that you are literally the tech behind
I was
that
the tech
idea.
person. And I will tell you, the engineers there were really mean to me. And I know it. So I really understand the feeling of being the outsider trying to come in. I mean, the tech bro world was real, and they became friends. I just think that I was just, I don't hate them for that. I think that I was just an anomaly. They didn't know what to do with me. They couldn't talk the way that they normally talked. Before I had that job, I had a job. It was like Peach Web. They named all the servers after strip clubs.
Oh, right. Of course. Right.
Yeah. And so I was the only woman at that group, and that was just really awkward and weird. So going to MindSpring, really wonderful boss with core values and beliefs. Still, it was hard. But our first clients for web hosting was Hooters and NASCAR. It exploded. Everybody wanted to host a website. And so we were off to the races, and it was wonderful, and it was hard and exciting.
I'm going to
And
interrupt 1 second. I'm going to tell also a Hooter story. Just again, I think to give context to people who are listening to this, who are younger than we are, and recognizing kind of what the world looked like at this point. So probably roughly around the same time, maybe a few years later, I had left Atlanta, and I was now in Chicago, and I was working at an ad agency and had a very, very challenging client. And I was working on Coors Beer, which in and of itself was its own weird world. And my client made a bet with my boss that if I could go, I was going to go to the Hooters 500, which was the race that they were sponsoring. If they could get me in a Hooters t-shirt, he would give my boss $100.
oh my God.
Right. And you look at that now and think, what were they thinking? And at the time you're kind of complicit going, well, buddy, if you're paying him, I get half that money, and so you're trying to like be a team player in that environment. But when you really look back on it now with the lens that we have, right? And you think about that brand, and you think about what it meant to Atlanta, and you think about what it meant to the work that we were doing back in the day. And advertising was so much more egalitarian than tech was back in the day. But even so, we were still dealing with those kind of biases. So you wonder again why we don't have more women that were in it. I think it was so amazing that they hired you as an engineer in that role. Like I give super credit to the founders of that to see how brilliant you were. And I think probably because you'd had, some time already teaching with those, or working with those girls and doing some of the other stuff, you had the maturity to walk into that space and go, this is like compared to what you just came through, right? And what those other young women were going through. This is.
I mean, it's interesting because I actually had, I had a pretty significant amount of experience because I'd helped set up the internet at Georgia State and really had a lot of systems administration background. And the work was very fun and doable. I mostly did Perl scripting. I don't know if people recognize that. I loved it. It's like connecting all the different computers and doing a lot of SQL database stuff. And it was great, but it was very, very intense. But I was moving up in the company, and I didn't understand this. I did not realize that as a manager, you didn't have to be the smartest one in the group. or the one that knew the most. So that was very awkward for me as a young person and as a female. And, with people who really knew what they were doing and knew more about this program or that program. And so I felt really awkward being a manager. And so I was kind of looking to do something different. And I landed a really excellent job, which was the interface of the internet with special effects. And so Georgia State. So I had been at Georgia State. I went to go to Mind Spring, and then Georgia State had made a grant with Kodak to do the scanning of film. So you would scan film frame by frame and then put it on a Unix computer and do the special effects on that computer. So you would scan like the background and then the foreground, the green screen, of the person doing the action, in the background, like the Grand Canyon. And then you would composite them on the computer and then print it back to film. So my technical skills mixed with my, photography skills really were just like the perfect intersection for that. And that was just super exciting and fun. And in millions of various capacities, I've been at Georgia State since then at the intersection of art and technology.
Right. Again, what I love so much, I just hope that young people listen to these conversations, that our careers are not linear. And when you think you studied something over here and it's not relevant to something, all of a sudden it's becoming the thing that makes you the most perfect and the most unique for this next role that you're in. So would you say you just follow curiosity? Like, how have you been in these positions that seem to come together? So like, what would be the secret attribute that one would need to be able to do that so successfully, you think?
Yeah, definitely, my passions, I think, always translate well into the work. And that's how I end up having work that feels fun and meaningful and inspiring, I guess, something that I'm just so continue to be curious about. So while I was there, being a technologist, and I used to call myself the digital janitor because I really had to go around. I mean, I had to do a lot of, that's the fun part, but I had to set up all the computers and connect them all and answer every help desk question and every student that had a problem, not all glamour at all, so you got to take the good, the bad with the good, right? Because it was work. But while I was at Georgia State, I got my MFA in digital filmmaking.
Yeah.
And so when I got that, I did the rare thing, which is converted from staff to faculty. And that's a rarity. But so I also found that I really enjoyed teaching, going back to doing like babysitting and camp counseling and the work with the girls. Again, that skill transforms itself into the ability to teach.
I think that, the other thing that I'm listening to as I hear the various portions of the career is also knowing when to shift gears, right? When to say that this doesn't feel right anymore and I'm going to move over here. And when this doesn't feel right, I move over there, or how to turn this into that, like to your point, take a path that wasn't necessarily well worn and having the confidence to step into those various roles. So let's talk about where you are now. So you're a professor at Georgia State University. I don't know if many people know much about Georgia State. It's a unique school in Georgia, I think, in terms of the population that it serves and its role downtown. Do you want to describe a little bit more?
Yeah, so Georgia State has 50,000 students. So Georgia State University is in downtown Atlanta, but then we sort of absorbed all of the technical colleges and two-year colleges. So those are great feeders into the downtown campus. But it is, we graduate more African-American students than any school in the United States, including every HBCU.
And there's all
So
feeder schools, right? There's nobody who's like on campus, or do you have on-campus housing? It's
oh
always,
no, it's very there's full on campus too. It
okay,
started
that's
as a
interesting.
commuter school, but now what they did, because downtown had what many downtowns have, which is the exodus of everybody leaving. So Georgia State took all the hotels that were downtown and turned them into dorms.
Oh,
And so
clever.
now downtown is being revitalized as the arts capital of the city because all the businesses moved to Midtown.
Right.
So
No, that's clever. So that's great, actually. Okay, cool. So you've got 50,000 all undergrad, or how many grad?
no. So we have 50,000 students. We have, and I'm jointly appointed in the business school, believe it or not. So I teach MBA students and creative students. Again, just capitalizing on opportunities. I mean, and I'll be honest, the business school pays double what the College of Arts and Science pays.
Wow.
So
You're in
half of
business
my
school.
salary comes from that because one of the things that people might not realize is that if you're in the arts and science, if you're in the arts and teaching, your salary is incredibly low and it does not go up very much. And, if you get good research, you can possibly get some kind of, increase in salary, but the salaries. So one of the things that's interesting is when I moved from being a technologist staff, which is seen as sort of lower tier, and I cannot stand it at the university. Staff is seen as lesser often in a university where there's faculty because they're the ones with the brains, which is not true at all in my opinion. But my salary will not increase nearly to the degree that had I stayed a technologist.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
But you're also an entrepreneur. So that's the interesting thing, right? Is that you've got all these other, I wouldn't say side hustles. I just think other dimensions to your
Mhm.
work. It's just not as static, which again, when we talk about the future of work, right? Is one of our friends will describe it as a portfolio career, but the fact is you've got these multiple things that you do and hats that you wear, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm an opportunist in, I think, the good way, because one would think of an opportunist as sort of negative, but when you see an opportunity, and yes, like you said, you have the confidence to step in. I like new things and I like doing new things. I'm going to be a person who's not going to, I never teach the same classes. I get a class started and then I hand that off to somebody else and then I go into the next thing. That's just who I am. I have to be aware of that. So this summer I did a lecture for a university in Poland, a series of lectures for a university in Poland that was on AI and creativity. And then I am an expert witness in a crypto fraud case. And then I did consulting for Trilith Studios and Trilith Institute on how to um, use entrepreneurial skills and ideation to figure out how to amplify their educational offerings. So there's three really different things.
Yeah, I love it. So the other thing I think is that you've had literally a lived experience to see us go from not having an internet to what it meant to build all the infrastructure and all the education and all the various components to make the internet what it is today, for better or for worse, in all honesty. And there are some things that I think are going to shift again, hopefully in that space. But so your ability to look ahead and see where it will, again, the metaverse look like, if we're still going to call it then, or spatial computing feels much more tangible, I think, to you and much more real to you than it does even to me, or certainly to someone who's not in the space at all. So as you look what you're teaching right now and you look ahead, can you take us through a bit of a journey of what it is that we can sort of start to wrap our head around and what this looks like? Because we've, on the outside, look at it and say, oh, we got all excited about this thing called the metaverse. And then it kind of went into this metaverse winter, right? Right at the time that my son, who had a course of study in that, was looking for a job. So this, that his timing is less perfect than yours around some of this stuff. But where are we and what we can see is moving forward, and whether that's blockchain, whether that's NFTs, whether that is some intersection of all of this with digital arts and digital creation of things. Like I don't even know where to begin to ask the right question. So take me through what I need to know.
Yeah, it's this whole idea of, I mean, right now we're virtual, and this is an amazing scenario, and more and more of our lives
Meaning in
as
this interview, right?
this
We're
interview,
virtual.
we're not in we're not IRL, right? We're synchronous, but we're not IRL in real life. And I see this gradation or movement where we will spend more and more of our time online. And if you look at, Gen Alpha, they definitely spend a lot of time online, and they spend a lot of time in 3D worlds and in gaming. But gaming in the sense of collaborative gaming or just hanging out like Roblox and Minecraft, and not, Grand Theft Auto where you're shooting, or actually Grand Theft Auto actually does have a very hangout kind of capability to it. But I think we're, and for better or for worse, but we're, what I always say is everything in the real world is being recreated in the virtual world.
Right.
And I don't think, and I think one of the things that we're lacking in, you said, all of this social media, poison that's happening. It's because we don't have enough people who are thinking about civics and society and regulation in the virtual world as we do in the real world. We have so many rules in the real world and so many things about what you should and shouldn't do. Like when you're supposed to start drinking and when's too much drinking. We have every kind of rule you can imagine, and what we put in our bodies, but we haven't built that infrastructure in the virtual world yet. And we're in the process of it. And we've made lots of terrible mistakes. But I think that, and I think AI is a huge accelerant on building 3D worlds. And I do think that we will get to a place where where this could be a little bit more natural, so that you and I aren't tethered to sitting, because it's not comfortable to sit for much more than an hour, just totally still. It's not, so I think we need to untether ourselves, but connect ourselves better. How it's going to work out, I don't know completely. But one thing I was thinking about, because I knew we were going to have this, conversation, because you're a futurist and you do a lot of future studies, scenario building in 3D worlds and simulations are really excellent. Let's not include everybody, but let's sort of see what might happen. That space is very interesting, I think, before we're all just, 3D avatars running around.
Well, I think, so if I were to ask you what percentage of into the future, like you can imagine this like future where this becomes a robust way in which we work, the same way that the internet now has become part of our, we can't imagine not having it, right? Online oxygen, I think is how someone described it once. When we get to that level of spatial computing, how far between now and then? Like, are we 1% in, 5% in, 10% in, do you think, to what it is what this could look like?
I think we're probably like maybe 2 to 5% in. People like right now, just like many technologies, I have friends who have companies that are palliative care for people who are bedridden, who use, VR to expand their experience.
Oh, wow.
So people who use, there's a company in Atlanta called Virtually Better that does basically exposure therapy in 3D headsets before you get on an airplane, before you do public speaking, before you, do anything that is hard for you to do. So I think that
we've been talking about those things to see that there are actually businesses that now already exist that are bringing that to people. And it's fascinating to see the businesses, right? You and I have been on panels before. We've had this conversation about how do you take what seems like a very far out idea and actually turn it into a tangible business, or tangible, something that we can use. It's not so difficult or hard to imagine. So again, putting on your entrepreneur's hat, these are the things that are happening in VR. What are some of the businesses that you think don't exist yet that will soon?
Well, so right now, I mean, the businesses that do exist are a lot of training. So a lot of really hard or dangerous things. So we see police training, firefighting training. So you can put yourself in those scenarios before you get involved in them. So that's that sort of very experiential, seeing things from different perspectives, walking in other people's shoes. We've kind of heard a lot about that. I think scenario planning, where you take Austin and say, what happens if we close off these streets? And you kind of look at what would happen for where all the cars would go, and you can do simulations before you actually do the thing. I think that we're going to see a lot of this sort of simulation stuff happening, because it's easier to do now that we have like NVIDIA's Omniverse, and we have Unreal Engine with a lot of AI plugins that just because it's just hard. It's hard to make 3D worlds. We're also starting to see, and I don't know if you really call this metaverse, but I still think it's interesting, so I'm going to say it. They're getting people who are disabled to be in headset or whatever and control robots to go do things in a third space somewhere.
I know. I saw it in Japan, right? I think they're using that to help people become robot pickers in stores.
Yeah.
It's someone who, yeah, it's so
Yeah.
fascinating.
So
And we've talked about that for years. We've said that even like a big construction vehicle, that historically someone needed to be very tall and strong, and really mechanically inclined to be able to go operate. You're not sitting at the top of a crane anymore, right? You're literally just using a joystick, and at some point, anybody from anywhere could be doing that, which is the thing that's so fascinating, operating any kind of like big machine or some sort of thing from a distance. So you start talking about global work and how interesting that would be.
yeah, definitely. I mean, and if I continue to use my headset and try the newest, latest games and experiences, and it's all becoming a lot more physical. So now so the LiDAR scan can scan your room. And one of the things that I love the most is that you've got this sort of mixed reality. So you're not just in a virtual space, because that's what gives everybody the disorienting dizziness kind of thing. But so it integrates the real world with the virtual world. There's a lot more movement. So it's got cameras that can so you can dance and you can repeat dances and learn how to sort of dance. It's still heavy and cumbersome and clunky. And, will it be in glasses? Or I know that you've got this idea of the contact lens type of thing.
Yeah, I really do believe that that's going to be the form factor that's going to be easiest.
Something glasses, I'm not really sure. So the mixed reality component, I think, is also going to be really interesting, because right now we're all loving this idea of AI. But if I could like pull up my notes while I'm talking to you, and it's scrolling through my glasses, or it's whispering in my ear, don't forget to tell Nancy that you remember you were going to say that.
Right.
So I do think that we're going to augment our bodies with information, and
I think the most about this future that you can actually, I was just going to say the humane pin, right? Kind of came like in this fiery thing. And it's been really interesting to ask Zane, because I was like, should we get one of these things to just play with? Because I was always like trying to buy sort of first generation. I will say I bought first generation Pebble Watch, I bought first generation Leap Motion. Like these things were never great first generation.
right.
But it's been really interesting to see, again, my 24-year-old son say, no, like there's no there. Like, why would somebody buy that? There's no use case that makes sense. There's no whatever. And he does a lot of reviews online and sees other people's take on these things. So I think they're becoming much more savvy about these various technologies or different things to try. But when you think about, what it is that what excites you the most, or what is it that you want? Like, how do you want this to work? Do you want to have some sort of augmented thing that all day long you're able to flip back and forth between worlds or connect with AI data in an ambient way?
Yeah. What I want is, I'm really into this whole idea of quantified becoming, which is the way that I didn't realize that I was getting so little sleep. And then I read, why we sleep, and I got the Apple Watch. And then I realized, oh, I really need to concentrate more on my sleeping. All of us have gotten into this, didn't get my steps in, we're doing a lot of quantifying for our health, but I think we're going to do some quantifying for our brains as well. And because I'm an educator, I am looking for ways for my fabulous, wonderful students to figure out how to make small steps in improvement, because a lot of them are like, I want to be a film director. And I'm like, okay, well, it's like saying I want to be a basketball player. You don't become a basketball player without dribbling every day and exercising and doing push-ups. There's a lot of little steps that get you towards all those things. And I think that quantifying yourself and being honest with yourself about where you are and making these quantified, movements forward, that I think is something that I'm super passionate about and interested in. Because I think that there's so much human potential in every single individual. And, education is supposed to be the thing that amplifies that potential. But, self-motivation and, you've got to do the work, it doesn't just wash over you. Right. And so,
Well, so let's talk about that. Education in the future. So 10 years from now, you may not be teaching this stuff anymore, but somebody else will be. How will education itself, either A, how it's delivered, or B, even how we think about it? I just don't think it's going to be a place that we go and we sign up and we go and do a course for just a few weeks and then we hope we've got some, proficiency in it and then we move on to the next thing. I think it's going to be a whole different model. But when you imagine the future of education, even just 10 years from now, what do you see different?
well, so I'm looking at, Khan Academy. Now Saul Khan has gone into the Khan Mingo, which is an AI tutored experiment. It's not there yet because I play around with it, but I think he's got some really interesting ideas. He's got plenty of backing. He's got the history. He's got the audience, that are using this content. But I think an ongoing tutor who's like, today I want to learn how to grow, mushrooms. I want to learn how to grow mushrooms. And so like, why that's a great thing for a person to learn. There's so much to that. And if that's what my passion is, off I go. And if I want to learn how to dance, or if I want to learn how to write a song, you can just, and then you're like, yeah, but you still need to learn physics. It's like, okay, well, let's do physics through, songwriting or storytelling or
Dance. Yeah.
my background is, I'm a gardener. So let's kind of incorporate physics into gardening, but another person's background might be music or, so really personalizing basically so that the passion aligns with the learning. And the why is all built in there.
Do you still see a role of an instructor that would be teaching 30 people at the same time? Or is it all then super individualized and how is that delivered, do you think?
You know, I think that AI is making us all work harder, to be honest, because I have access to all kinds of AI. Well, all that's doing is making me want to try harder and do new things and try GPTs and try, and I still have to do all the assessment is still very hard. So a lot of us are kind of moving into having people do oral reports, like this kind of conversation cannot be AI because it's real time. You on the fly, you throwing out questions, right and left, and I have to stand. So that's a really good way of assessing. The essay is gone now, so that's we're all figuring it out. But for the next 10 years, I do think that somebody's going to be facilitating. Maybe there'll be less of us. Maybe maybe I'll have a bunch more students because I've got AI agents that are kind of helping kind of assess and it's off and running. But I don't see something so personal with humans being that automated.
It's going to be an interesting thing. So our mutual friend, Erin Riley, who we were talking to the other day, has created her first digital avatar of herself, right? The professor at UT at the Texas Immersive Institute. Right now, just to be kind of a greeter at the building when you come, and she wants to tell you about the TXI program, but she is sick of answering the same questions over and over and over and over again and teaching some of the basic stuff. And so she's like at the very front end of trying to create an avatar that would fulfill some of the basic stuff of what it is that she is asked to do. So we're at the front end of that potential, right? We see something like the Alpha School, which is started by a woman here in Austin, in which she sort of flipped it in the sense that students come, and I think it's kindergarten through college, who come just in the morning for 2 hours. Well, actually, they're there all day, but in the morning, they spend 2 hours with adaptive applications, exactly as you were describing, right? So history taught uniquely for this student and math taught uniquely for that student. And they kind of bear down on the academic portion of this stuff for a couple of hours. And then they work with coaches to think about life skills. So they think about like, what does it mean to start a business? What does it mean, to your point, to start to garden? What does it mean to learn, what do taxes do? Whatever it is that they're interested in doing, building something. And in her students, some of the examples that she gave is like, it's not conceptual, right? Two kids wanted to open a skateboard park and wondered what it would take to do that. And they literally have gone all the way through the process from design, permitting, raising money, construction, running a business, and like opened a skateboard park, right? So imagine like the real world stuff that every time I talk to somebody under 20, they're desperate to learn. Like that's the stuff they want to know about, like how does the world work? How do taxes work? I met a young 19-year-old in Tangier, Morocco, whose father was a bus driver and his mother was a homemaker. And he's like, tell me about taxes. Like, what happens there? But her results apparently are like they test twice as high on an assessment level as students who are taught on a 6-hour day. Right, her 2-hour day against the 6-hour day, she's able to have twice as strong a performance. And she'll say she doesn't have teachers; she has guides. Right now, again, it's a model that's delivered through an expensive private education thing right now. So she's charging a significant amount of money for students to be in this program. Interestingly, but she has a waiting list apparently in Ukraine and in other places where people are trying to figure out where you don't have the luxury of this this model where someone can spend this many hours a day or spend this much money doing something or whatever. I always need to make sure that people have more access to education as a potential model that would be rolled out. So if you imagine, if you've got, again, kids in refugee camps around the world and we could give them just a few hours a day and they'd be able to stay, current or level, like that's to me the big win here is accessibility for education. And then once you get to this level of accessibility, then you can have it be ubiquity in the sense that it will be constant part of our life now. It's not going to be these weird chapters where it is, I want to go learn something. People ask me about the future of an education or a degree. And I think that what we're going to be looking for is a demonstrated pattern of consistent curiosity and learning, right? And whether that's through badges or certifications or whatever, because in some ways, you've done that with all the various degrees and the things that you've done. But I have had less of the formal, but I have other ways in which I can demonstrate that I've been learning something or curious about something. Like I think that will be something that will be a different way of measuring, quote unquote, someone's proficiency or someone's ability to learn. Because I think even proficiency is going to change so much. It's going to be constantly that you're learning something new. So who's got that adaptive capacity, right? And how do we instill that? So as you think about this view of the future, right? And you think about the students that are coming to you now, are they prepared for this? Like, how do you prepare them for this kind of future?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually just have a paper coming out, which is so we had a class called Building the Metaverse. And we did a study on what are students' capacity to imagine their agency in their future and their ability to impact the world when they're taught these technologies. And it's very hard to study. And, we only had a class of 24 students, and then we kind of compared them to another class that wasn't the metaverse, but it was entrepreneurial class. And so for them to kind of imagine their knowledge of the future or their ability to imagine themselves in the future was huge. And their and just a little bit more technical skill than the average person, because the students come in and you think that they're technical, but they're consumers, they're not creators. So giving them just a little bit of creation skills with technology is huge. And I think that's something that's good. The study got a little bit sideways because generative AI was coming in at the time. And the students were overwhelmed by that at that point in time, because most of my students are artists in that class. And so that really threw them for a loop, because they were like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to have an idea? I mean, it's like, clearly that thing can draw better than I can. What am I doing? So we talked a lot about what, like the guide, teacher as guide, artist as producer, organizer, orchestrator, and kind of talking about that was really helpful. But, back to, your son has been super fortunate to have you as a mom, to go to UT Austin, and so there's a lot of managing self and managing emotions that is really a core to a lot of this. That if you kind of can't get to that point, and that's why all this quantified becoming, like, how can you become more empathetic? How can you become more aware of diverse perspectives, or aware of fake, what's fake and what's real? How can you manage your emotions so that you're not super reactive when something happens? Because those are the things that undo people,
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
mean, we've talked a lot about, like, again, interchange or inner work for outer change and all that stuff. It's actually really interesting when you talk about, like, how important it will be. Like, I keep thinking we have to level up our consciousness to be able to keep up with the demands of technology, right? Um,
totally.
and how do we, and part of it is just, how we handle ambiguity, because there is so much ambiguity, and we've been trained up to a certain point to really look for security as individuals, and certainly as systems, right? When you think about, again, how education is around the Common Core and making sure that we can assess everybody against a standardized test. And we have all these things that are supposedly designed to ensure that we're doing it right, when we're in a world that is so much more fluid and so much more in flux, and just certainly not clear, right?
Yeah.
So again, when you think about the students that are coming into your classroom, I think, again, specifically as artists, it's a really, really interesting perspective, right? So on the one hand, really happy, comfortable with ambiguity from a creation standpoint, right? They're the ones who can go create something out of nothing, which is the beauty of being an artist or a competent artist. But they're in a world right now where they don't know what that means and how that works. Like, how do they enter the class, and how do they leave the class? And to your point, generative AI was part of this at one point, but now we've had it for a year and a half, I guess, in our world. As you're seeing, anticipating the students, that you're going to see in just a few weeks again. Where are they? Are they excited? Are they scared? I mean, we hear all kinds of things, right? The sort of sense of fatalism about why try, because the machine's just going to do it anyway.
Right. I've got, it's just like personalities. I've got the whole range. Some who are like, I'm not using that. That stuff is scary and it's bad and whatever. And I'm like, and then there's other students who are like, oh my gosh, look at this. And then there's other students who are just like, press the button, here you go, I'm done.
The whole idea about, actually, I'm not going to use it, scary, is actually a really, really interesting question. And we're also seeing that somewhat on a gendered perspective, right? I don't know if you're seeing that, but the data shows that, like, generative AI, 2 to 1, male to female, going in there and playing with it, feeling confident about it, not wanting to be, left out of it or whatever, versus others who think it is either overwhelming or scary or don't want, or cheating. But we don't want to see that gender gap. That's actually a terrible.
It's all that women in technology is another thing. I have always just been a huge advocate, because I realized it was my ability to be technical and my ability to get the confidence to show that I was technical is how the trajectory of my career has been, is the, core of it. And so I'm a huge advocate. As a matter of fact, I'm going to Tunisia on a Fulbright in November to teach women how to use augmented reality to show off their city's culture. And
Oh, that's so cool.
and so it's everything that I believe in, in And really, the ultimate goal is not for them. I mean, maybe they'll make something amazing, but the ultimate goal is for them to have a reason to learn new technologies, to have the confidence to create something. And ultimately, they want them to be able to be entrepreneurs of any sort where they have built up these skill sets. And that's a lot of what I do at Georgia State. So I teach arts entrepreneurship, and that's why I teach in the business school. I teach business and tech to creatives, and then I teach tech and creative to business people.
Who is easier to teach? Which?
You know what? Honestly, the undergrad art students are more open-minded. When I get those business, so a lot of our business students are international, and some of them that come from where they argue with me about getting an A plus versus an A. And I'm like, that is so not, I was like, you're 35 and that is so not the point. But, you know, they come in. So a lot of them work at Truist. So some of their MBAs are paid for by their companies, and they are set in their ways of winning.
Yeah, see, this is what I talk about these days. I'm using the word repatterning our future, repatterning the way that we think. And this is part of it, is getting out of that thinking. And that's when people ask me about going to grad school for business, I usually dissuade them from that, because I think it calcifies an old way of thinking. It doesn't prepare us for this kind of thinking. And, you know, and one of my good friends, screenwriter Jim Hart, will always say the arts will save us, right?
Uh-huh.
I think that's why I've always been drawn to being in creative communities, because of the open-mindedness around all that. But as we wind down, you had asked me to remind you about talking about NFTs. So let's talk about NFTs and art and business and future, and how those things are all
Well, you know, I don't really know. I mean, so I have access to Grok's AI image generator, and it does not have guardrails on it. So I don't know if you've seen, but, you know, people have put, you know, I'm like, create a photorealistic picture of Donald Trump holding hands with a pregnant Kamala Harris and gazing into her eyes. Boom, it makes it perfectly right then and there. So that's where we're at.
What is the technology? Grok? I haven't even heard of Grok.
Grok is Elon Musk's X. He's got his own AI that is now, you know, up with the top 3 or 4 you know, AI large language models and image generators, but he doesn't put guardrails on it, you know. And remember, Meta is creating you know, is got the open source large language model that you can put on your computer and say anything, do anything. So I am, you know, I'm trying to understand, what are we going to, and some people call it that we're in this age of AI slop. You know, just so much stuff is being created, so much junk. You know, how do we find the nuggets, and then again, find who's the source, what's the reality of this, and track it and trace it. And there's got to be a technology, and I think blockchain might be the technology behind that. We don't need to have everything have that done. But okay, so say you publish this conversation, you could have me saying anything, whatever you wanted. So maybe there needs to be a sign off where I sign off on something and you sign off on something, and this is real, and this is a real conversation that really happened, because it could be fake. So there's got to be a blockchain technology.
There was an interview that I was listening to, as was mentioned earlier today, on heartbeat signatures. There was an artist talking about heartbeat signatures. I had no idea like how we would like put a pulse on our, you know, our thing and our computers, and it would both like monitor that this was like real people, and this was our heart print. But really trying to get to the thing that is uniquely human, right? Whether it's our retina or our heartbeat or something, and then figuring how to encode that into a file in some way. But then you've got this idea of derivative works, right? I have another friend who was working for many years on the derivative works model. So I create something, that you take it and you do something with it, and somebody else does something. And then you know, you've got 17 heartbeats that are part of this experience. And the question is, can you trace it back to what each of us contributed to that? Which is, if you look at actually the screenwriting world, a really fascinating thing, because multiple people work on projects over time, as you know, right? And who do you give the credit to as the writer or as the story was by or whatever, when you've had all these various people involved. And somehow they figured out a way to do it through arbitration and through some sort of, very specific process through the guild, which I think is really, really interesting as a model for thinking about this. But now you've got, how do you do that at scale with, so many things happening at the same time. And to your point, we have not built enough of the infrastructure to keep up with what's happening on the technological creation part.
Totally.
So
Well, I just want to say one thing to that because I think it's very interesting. So the heartbeat, a lot of people call that soul-bound tokens, which I love that term, soul-bound tokens. But at some point in time, you're like, oh my gosh, do we have to attribute every single thought that anyone ever had? Because everything that we do is derivative, based on the collective. Right. So a lot of people call it collective intelligence instead of artificial intelligence, because we're all just building upon each other's knowledge. It's only because we have to make money that we have to kind of attribute everything. So I love the circular economy, and I want to learn more about all of that through you and others.
That's why I do think the economic side of this is the huge missing piece of the conversation. Yeah.
So will.i.am was on a podcast with Peter Sarthy, and he was talking about seeds. So if you've done any kind of editing, especially music editing, it's called stems. And so you've got the stem, which is like the drum track, and then the guitar track, and those are stems. But they're using this term called seeds, which I think is very interesting, which is like they will create the seed of a song, and then you can go and create sort of derivatives from that, but it's based on their seed. But so people like Imogen Heap and will.i.am are very open to this idea, but they already have enough money and fame to not worry about it. And so honestly, it's super interesting to watch all of the intellectual property stuff that's going on right now, and where all this is going. It is so hard to figure out and understand, but it's just a fascinating world that I think that I'm constantly trying to keep up with.
Well, and they're, an amazing moment in time to be, I think, a part of. Like, I feel really lucky to be here because I feel like, again, we're setting up so much of the foundation for it. And how these things will, how we prepare ourselves, to your point, mentally, how we think about this and the models around it, and then also the financial and legal and everything else around it that for generations to come, we'll look back and see, just like the Constitution. We're thinking a lot about the Constitution as a document that has sort of held us together as a nation, for better or for worse, and the things that we love about it and things that we hate about it, but it's still sitting here this many years later as the document that we go back to. So I feel like we're creating some versions of that in how we navigate these technologies. And it's not just, spatial computing technologies, and it's not just AI, right? We think about bioengineering and all the other things that are, emerging at the same time that we need to develop a better literacy too. So the thing I'm going to walk away with in this conversation is when you start talking about these simulations and worlds and whether or not you close the highway, like I would love to have the Nancy Giordano simulation of what my life looks like if I make these different choices. Right? Like, interesting to literally imagine myself. Like when you talk about, visualization, there was a full moon last night and I'm sitting under the full moon and you're trying to do this manifesting or just visualizing like where I want to be in my world. And we talk so much about imagination, how important imagination is and being able to create any new idea. I think we're also limiting beliefs. I was going like, what are my limiting beliefs right now? Because I don't have my, AI psychologist that listened to my dreams last night and knows exactly what my limiting beliefs are. I was trying to get there, but imagine if we could like plug yourself into a world in which I'm like, well, what does it look like if I lived in Barcelona for a while? What does it look like if I became a teacher here? What if it would, and like embody it and imagine how that would feel, like how cool that would be as a self-development. Talk about your quantified becoming.
Yeah.
Right. Like that, I just think would be such a fascinating individual tool to have.
Let's do it.
I do think that, we're sitting on so much, Elizabeth. The fact that you and I will not start a company around this when watching everybody else do it is really foolish. So I think we need to get on that one.
Okay. That's for after the interview.
I will come back and announce it to the world of what it is that we're doing. The issue is not that we can't. The issue is that I've got like 47 ideas of those. And so I think it's the discipline that you're teaching your students and the discipline that I'm sure that if I meditated, I would get to, that we will find the one that is uniquely the one that we're supposed to be bringing the world right now, and encourage every other one who's listening to this point to find your thing. I mean, I
Yeah,
think really
totally.
we're at this moment where everything can be either redesigned and recreated if you're frustrated by it, or invented. And we know another person, I think, Worley, who talks so much about citizen scientist and the fact that, or citizen creator, citizen designer, citizen artist, who can speak it into being in a
Yeah.
for a period of time. So use that power wisely, let the imagination fly, and create the world that we really want to live in. So that Elizabeth and I can retire whatever beautiful
You
place
won't
it is.
retire. I won't retire. I'm going to be creating stuff forever. And I'm so excited about all the possibilities. And, I just, I'm so fortunate that I got to know all these futurists because I didn't even know that that was a thing until I met Derek Woodgate and realized there's people that like study this and do this. And now futurists are my people, citizen
You
futurists.
are, well, you are a part of it. And again, and it's also one of those things where I think all of us are going to be future. All of us literally are futurists. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of which we're willing to open that door to what's possible, because that's exactly the capacity that we need to be able to go build the thing, which is part of why we're doing this podcast series, to increase everyone's enthusiasm and interest and thoughtfulness about the future, right? Because this is where we are at this moment in time. So I'm so glad you were on the ride together, sister.
Yep.
Thank you for
Yep.
your time. We're going to do this again. This is really, really fun. And thanks for all the capacity you're opening for the students who are lucky enough to be in your classroom and just to
Yeah.
so
I
have
love
fun.
doing it. And happy birthday.
Why, thank you. Speaking of which, so when I say retire, by the way, I'm not necessarily saying that we're not still going to be creating and doing things, but it'd be really fun not to worry about the economic hustle at some point. So while you keep creating, I'm going to keep trying to figure out how we build the economic, um, whatever, again, scaffolding or whatever perspective, to be able to keep doing this stuff and not have to worry about the other side of it. Because that is the thing that as you get older, you're like, there's just got to be a better way of
Got to
navigating
be.
pieces of it. So here's to lots and lots of birthdays to come. Mwah. Thanks so much, babe.
Bye.